begin with a few remarks. We'll talk for a bit, and then after the other films, we'll come back and have a very short comment and your questions. One of the things, as you know, this is distributed by Watermelon Films. It's one of the first platforms for exclusive distribution of Palestinian cinema. And Rashid Masharawi, who's the filmmaker, curator in this case, has been very excited that it was distributed through this particular platform. He grew up born in Gaza from a family of refugees who are originally from Jaffa. And he grew up in the Shati refugee camp in North Gaza. And he's made over 20 films. One of his best known is Curfew, made in 1994, which was one of the first feature films from the Gaza Strip. What is interesting about him now is he's been working in Ramallah, where he founded the Cinema Production and Distribution Center in 1996 with the aim of promoting local productions. And he could have made a film, you know, given the urgency of the mass industrial killing in Gaza. He could have made his own film, but he decided to set up a fund, the Masharawi Fund, to collaborate with local filmmakers and invite these 3 to 6 minute shorts. So we have this anthology of shorts, and maybe we could begin with, you know, his decision to curate this multiplicity of stories that make up this film. So if you guys want to talk a little bit about that.
Thank you, Bishnu. So yeah, this is very different from the other films that I've sat in theatrical exhibition spaces at festivals to watch. Really, I've seen a lot of documentaries and narratives from Palestine, and to see this collection of 22 short films where you have a variety of narrative and documentary film styles, one after the other, sort of changing mode from film to film is really unique. And I think for me, it really reflects the moment. It really reflects the kind of storytelling that this genocide has demanded. It's fragmented. It sometimes feels incomplete. You have a multitude of voices. You follow somebody, you know, on social media, and you see fragments of their lives, and then they go silent. And so I think the sort of the stops and starts of the film, the multitude of voices, the different approaches, are reflective of the way that we have been witnessing. At the same time, it's entirely different because we're not on our phones scrolling. Right. Our attention is demanded differently when we're sitting in a theater and watching something at this scale. And so I think in one sense, it's taking the form of something that we already know, and how we're consuming images, and then putting it in a different kind of context that elevates it and demands our attention differently. So, you know, the citizen journalist model is something we're very familiar with at this point.
Right. Yeah, along these lines, I think what's so powerful about this format, and the reason why the multiplicity of these films is so effective, is that they give us glimpses into a vibrant, diverse society. And they undermine the monolithic depiction of Palestinians that is so prevalent, especially in Western media, either as the terrorists or as the victims. Right here in this case, everybody here has aspirations, dreams, pursues their ambition, has a story, has a history, and every one of these stories is unforgettable. So it actually reminds me of what Naomi Shihab Nye said when she was here on campus earlier this quarter. There is a story that only you can tell. And she invited basically the students to start writing. But in this case also, these stories are told by people that who were the only ones to tell them. And so by that, I mean, usually, very often when we hear of Palestinian casualties, it's numbers, right? These stories are unforgettable, and here are people pulled out of the numbers. So, and it's that unforgettability of every one of these stories that I think gets the multiplicity really effectively across.
Yeah, and I think in a interview on Democracy Now, he had talked about how the third film, Sorry Cinema, where it's Ahmed Hassouna, and he was thinking about, he had known him before. And so I think to your point, Elisabeth, that we have this sense of loss of homes, loss of lives, but actually the loss of a trajectory of a life, that this enormous collection of creative practitioners, the painters, the dancers,
right.
the singers, the comedians, I mean, it's such a full space. And so that loss of aspiration, I think, was I think one of the things that's a very strong takeaway. And the other thing that you were saying, Mona, I think was, and this gets into the next part of it, is sort of the testimonial form. I mean, there's such a long history of testimony, and the talking head testimony as a part of documentary. This is very heterogeneous, but it reminds me of my first couple of years, I think, in the U.S. When the Rigoberta Menchú, some of you might remember, there's a testimonial controversy where she had witnessed the Guatemalan genocide. And she was talking about it, and then people said, well, the stuff that she wrote in her testimonial was actually not true. And she said, well, I was one of the single survivors, and I collected the stories of others so it was a collective representation. When I watch this film, it's got that quality, that it actually cannot be one story,
Yeah, and if I can elaborate on the question of witnessing. So I would like to make 3 points. First of all, the very first short is literally a message in a bottle. Yeah. And the last film of the first half that you saw, so the first film starts with a shot of the Mediterranean, and the last film, the last film you just saw, ends with a shot of the Mediterranean. So one of the questions or one of the challenges this film addresses to us, we are the recipients of that message in a bottle. Will we receive it? Will we read it? Will we amplify it? We have received it. I mean, the character in the first one says, I do not know you who will perhaps get that bottle, but we have clearly received this bottle. I mean, we are the adversaries. And the second thing I want to, that actually is connected to what you just said. Scholars like Jacques Derrida and Shoshana Fellman pointed out that witnessing is not about proving, but about transmitting. Yes. And if you put that together with the scholarship of psychoanalysts and psychiatrists who worked with survivors of massive trauma, they show that witnessing can work only for these survivors if there is an active listener, but also an informed listener. And so, by extension, one can say the film addresses us this question: are we willing to become the informed listener? That means to educate ourselves, not only about what happened on October 7th, and yes, we need to educate ourselves about that, but to insist that in all honesty, historical honesty, ethical honesty, we cannot separate that date and the crime that happened on that day from the decades of oppression that preceded it. So the question really is, are we willing to become that educated recipient of this message? And then I want to say a third thing, namely regarding the powerful short, soft skin that you just saw, about the children, because it gives such a powerful example of what witnessing can do. Here you have a group of children literally asked to imagine their own dismemberment. Anybody would have trouble finding language for that, let alone children. And this creative process that allows them to find the language is a creative process in which they literally put body pieces together and animate them, right? So that's a container for their own trauma, for the narration of their own trauma. And then the third aspect of that is very powerful and that can indeed be a result of witnessing is they are taking the agency to say, I will not be, I am not destined to be marked for dismemberment. I refuse to be marked for dismemberment, for death. So they are insisting on their being alive. And all that happens in those 5 minutes.
That's got to be one of my favorite shorts. I think it's really sort of stays, partly because it's a dreamlike escape, you know. And one of the things I think what you were saying about us there's a demand placed on us as, you know, to bear witness. And they were asked to produce 3 to 6 minute shorts, but some of them you want the story to go on. I don't know if you felt that, but you were like, okay, this ended very abruptly. You know, what happened next? Where did these people go? Did he find, you know, was the house bombed? Did they get to Khalil's house? You know, all these questions, which is, I think, the demand is it has to be finished in the viewer. Mm-hmm. Yeah. You know, it's a kind of a open space invitation to at world making. And the other part of it, I think, that has to do with the ongoing Nakba is there are many memories, and we'll see more of this, where, you know, 1948, a lot of people from who were displaced came to the Gaza Strip. And so there is a kind of, the trauma is kind of cumulative. Yeah. And the film, over time, sort of stitches 1948, you know, into these spaces that in some ways we've gotten used to in the news, but, you know, we get to know much better in the film. And so, you know, I know, Mona, your expertise is in spatial, you know, the spatial grammar of cinema. And, you know, here, one of the things that I loved about this film is it made Gaza familiar. You know, there's the ocean, repeated the ocean, the sky, the bustling market, the long strip in between. And we've seen images of this, but somehow they made more sense. So I'm wondering if you could speak a little to how we get to know Gaza as a space in this audiovisual form.
Yeah, yes. So I think it's really striking where we sit in Santa Barbara and watching the images of Gaza, like constantly looking out at the Mediterranean, looking out at the sea, just the familiarity of that imagery and how it resonates for me as a viewer living here is profound. And the sense of scale, I just want to share this because I think about this, you know, the Gaza Strip is approximately 25 miles by 7 miles. Okay, so that's Isla Vista to Carpinteria. Mm-hmm. So with the population that is nearly 3 times that of San Francisco. And the way that space is constructed in these films, I think is incredibly important because the images that we see of Gaza, the rubble has been normalized, the tent cities have been normalized, these sort of like lines where people are waiting and waiting and waiting have been normalized. And here we get to see actually the relational quality of people to this place where they live. So how they wait, when it works out, when it doesn't work out, when they're seeking basic needs, basic resources, water, electricity, to charge their phone, food, bread, these basic things that we just don't even think about, right? So, and just how the city has now, how these spaces, these urban spaces have been shaped around that search for what we need to sustain ourselves. One of the things that just, when I watch these films, the professor who says, I have everything I need.
Yeah,
I know.
I mean, it guts me because that is a message to us. It's very deliberately a reflection of our relationship to imagining Gaza, imagining the kind of scarcity and the kind of impossibility of the conditions that people are living in. And I think one of the things that this film does so beautifully, because we're invited inside, we're spending a lot of time in interior spaces inside these tents, seeing families with their children, seeing a mother with her children cuddling in the bed, seeing the comedian bathing. How does someone take a shower? How does someone bathe in these conditions? You know, like, how do you cook? You have to pull wood off of a door frame to chip the wood to cook your food, right? These things that we can suddenly imagine how it actually is to be there, rather than seeing it as from an exterior view where everything is so caricatured as rubble, tents, devastation, victimization. And no, this is a place where people live. This is a relationship between people and their land and their communities and their families. And all of that is what makes that's what makes this space. And so I think that multiplicity that we get of perspectives is what allows us to build such I think we will all walk away tonight seeing Gaza very, very differently.
Yeah, and I think part of it is, you know, there are continuities, the sea and the sky. You know, they kind of create Gaza. It's always the Mediterranean, you know. And then you have the drone.
Yes.
You know, the one consistent thing that you have on all the shots is the sky. You know, and the sky is full of sound and threat. You know, so I was also trying to look, as we are trained to do often, common patterns. Right? These are so heterogeneous. They're so diverse. Even the ways of telling, the cameras are different, all of these styles. But there are some common themes that move across these films. And I wonder if, I mean, I'm sure if we open this up, many of you would have different ways of approaching the through line through these films. But I wondered if you wanted to address some of these. What's the commonalities?
Yeah, so one commonality is, a concept by a Palestinian scholar, Nadira Shalhoub-Kevorkian. She coined the concept of unchilding. And that's really what I think is a very common theme, you know, these children who stand in these lines. But unchilding actually is, for Shalhoub-Kevorkian, that these are children who seem to be unworthy of children's rights. Right? They are considered adults. They are considered killable. They have no special consideration in this particular situation, of course, or in the occupied territories as well. So, but since the children will be one of the questions for later, I will postpone that a little. But then there's something else that really, I think, links all of these films, that is making art as an affirmation of being alive and of resisting. And here I want to point out one of the shorts that you have seen, namely the one that is entitled Charm. You know, the one with the girl, she's 9 or 10, who at first plays a game of hopscotch with other children and then runs to the sea. And she imagines in her mind, she hears a first song. And that first song is the song Home by Amal Mathlouthi, who is a Tunisian artist who became famous for her song Kenti Hoda during the Tunisian revolution and it became the anthem for the Arab Spring. But then the girl goes to the beach, to the sand, sits down, and starts singing for herself another song. And she imagines voices joining her until there is an entire chorus singing. And then she gets up, and she has already been, imagined herself dancing, but she gets up and sings to that internal song. And so I checked what that song is. Yeah. And it's actually a tarwida, which is a Palestinian song that women, it's a genre that women created during the Great Palestinian Revolt in 1936. And it is a song that these women sang for loved ones who were imprisoned. And it's coded by adding the letter lam, L, to the words in between words and inside words, so that it sounds like gibberish, but in fact, those are messages of liberation, of hope, and of love that are conveyed to those prisoners inside. 1936, so the prisoners had the windows opening to the outside. But that she sings that song, and in her mind imagines that the song not only is joined by many voices, but also it allows her to do what she craves doing, namely dancing with her community. And so, on the surface, it's just about jumping around and dancing, but actually there are these two songs that are an absolute assertion of we will resist.
Thank you. I'm so glad that you did that research. That's incredible. Can I share, when I think about these films, the whole time I'm just holding on to the part of a poem that is very important to me. So I just want to read some of the lines from it. It's by Rafif Ziadeh, and she says, "We Palestinians teach life after they have occupied the last sky. We teach life after they have built their settlements, apartheid walls, after the last skies. We teach life, sir. We Palestinians wake up every morning to teach the rest of the world life, sir." So for me, the continuity across all these films is this impulse to live despite, to live in the face of, to live and go on, and with such dignity under the most degrading conditions imaginable. And for me, even just the making of a film under these conditions, the act of producing a testimony like this, the act of using the art of cinema for storytelling to the world, there's no greater form of waking up and teaching life, right? How?
And you go away with that.
You have to ask how.
Yeah.
And a lot of us wake up and we've read too much of the news, and we're depleted. So this is, I think, a testimony to how Palestinians really teach life. And we see that in many art forms, and this I think is really a testimony of that. Yeah. The other thing that I think cuts across a number of the films is the scholasticide, and this is related to the unchilding, the schools that have been destroyed, the 11 universities that have been completely obliterated, and you have students with no classroom. The child is going to his teacher's gravesite instead of going to school. You have a professor whose day is occupied by trying to charge his phone and get food and water for his family. The whole, the desire to get her books back and overburden. Those films that are also chronicling the very deep ways that the destruction of education has rippled through society and just transformed it.
Yeah, and that continues through. So I have a signal from our organizers that We may be going on too long, but we will return for your questions. We did have an ask of you that, we've all been inundated with images and, photographs and news coverage, and, you scroll past and you have this accumulative stress. These stories have a different quality, and I'm wondering what your through line would be. What's different from the reportage that you accumulate? What's different about watching these films back to back? So let's keep that in mind, and then we'll come back for a Q&A. So we'll keep our remarks very short because we'd like to hear from you as well. I think one of the things we did not talk about is really the media question, because one of the stories throughout, now that you've seen all of it, is about how do you write a story, produce a story, what do you actually grasp visually in what's happening around you. So I wonder if, Mona, you want to start us with that?
Yeah, we talked a little bit among ourselves about how many of the films are actually dealing with the question of the conditions of the production of the film, and how making a film in these conditions really just demands that part of the story is the making of the film. Sort of the conditions are so, I think beginning with Sorry Cinema, probably, the one that we saw early on, where the filmmaker is narrating, he's apologizing to cinema, he's saying, cinema, forgive me, because now all I need to do is just survive, basically. And a director who had great aspirations and had worked very, very hard. And we see that theme continue up until, this last film, even with the puppets, the comedian. There's so many who really, the story and the making of the story are one and the same. And I think that's actually something that we see, not just in Palestine, but certainly in Palestinian documentary, Five Broken Cameras, No Other Land, the recent Oscar winner. These are documentaries where you can't really extrapolate the story of how the fragile and precarious and dangerous conditions in which the film is being made from anything else about the story. And so I think this is just something that comes through really strongly in this collection of films.
And I think that self-consciousness probably increases towards the last segments of the film. We're increasingly thinking, especially that Wanissa one, where she actually, the donkey taxi, where she just stops and says that, I was going to make a film and something else. Just to wind up, I wonder if we could talk a little bit about the children that, Elisabeth, you started us on, because the figure of the child we all remember, well, some of us who are older remember, Kim Phuc, who's the napalm girl, remember, as figure for the Vietnam War. And since then, we've always had children, and Hind Rajab for this war, carry the burden of representation for the war. And I wonder if you guys wanted to comment on that.
Well, I think one should keep in mind that in 2023, half of the population in Gaza was under 20 years old. So it's a very young population. And obviously the children carry the burden of this terrible war. 17,400, that is an estimate, have been killed. That's of course, we do not know how many are under the rubble. So I think that is one of the powerful threads throughout this film, that the children are massively faced with this unfathomable destruction, and the way they cope and still try to play, but also try to narrate what is happening to them. And as you know already, I commented on two films, two shorts, where the children are front and center. And I really think that that is where we really, it really sinks in. What these children tell us also in the second to last, I think it is. But as I mentioned earlier, it is, I think, an illustration of what Nadira Kevorkian called unchilding, that these children cannot be children in this context.
Yeah, I mean, I just think some of the things, I mean, you see the role that children play in society. I mean, of course, you have the images of children playing, laughing, finding ways to sort of, these are the things, and these are some of the images that have circulated a lot on social media, because to see, despite the horrors of losing their families, I mean, in Gaza now there's this term for the sole survivor of a family. So children, infants even, whose entire family was wiped out and only one child survives. And so the images of seeing children playing, laughing, finding joy, singing, dancing, I mean, those are very powerful images. They're doing very powerful work, both within the community and also to audiences. But also you see children, I mean, they're waiting in line, they're collecting, they're constantly doing the labor of sustaining their families and making survival possible as well. So the role is completely different from, I think, what we can imagine, most of us here.
And also different from other wars where you have an iconic child often. You know, Aylan Kurdi washed up in the Syrian migration crisis. I mean, you have these major child figures, but here there are many children, and they're inescapable in this film as a, as a population. I mean, so I think it's an interesting comment that way.
You know, the last short, I mean, 2 sentences with which we are left is, this war is like no other war, and everyone is just watching. So I think, this war is like no other war. That might be one reason why this collection is called From Ground Zero. But this observation that the puppets make, these totally genius puppets, right, made of basically what is usually considered trash, right? You throw away those empty tins. Everybody is just watching. It is really a question, again, addressed to the audience. And since we are in the United States of America, I think we do need to remember that our taxpayers, our tax dollars pay for those 2,000-pound bombs. So we are implicated, whether we realize it or not, whether we agree or not, we are implicated. And this accusation, everybody is just watching, refers, of course, to the fact that this is the first live-streamed war that a whole lot of people, including in Israel, Israeli historians, journalists, human rights organizations, join that assessment that it is a genocidal war. And it is live-streamed on our devices. So everybody is just watching, I think, takes on here this very, very haunting indictment, yeah, exactly.
So Alex is signaling to me that this needs to be, I'll hand over the Q&A to you. So anything, any questions, comments? Yeah, please raise your hands.
First of all, thank you. I lived in Palestine for years. I really appreciate this. So to go off of just this observation of everyone is watching, I was just wondering if, if the three of you and whomever has, assembled this today, if you have a particular call to action that you have in mind that would be something that we could all do, that would be a form of advocacy and so on and so forth. That's my question.
I I think in the present political climate, I think the greatest action that we can all take is not to be silent, not to sort of in an anticipatory way begin to comply with this idea that to protect ourselves we have to stop speaking about Palestine. So it sounds really maybe basic, especially for those of you who have been speaking about Palestine, who have been part of movement building for a long time. But I think in this moment, it's more important than ever that we collectively continue to speak about Palestine.
And I think there are so many sort of fundraising efforts for, in various, I'm sure the audience knows about this well, from tents to sponsoring students who are learning in Gaza in all kinds of ways. There is all of that, and I think there's so much multiplicit need that it would be hard to say that, to endorse one thing or another, but I really would like to back Mona's idea that one of the things that we've tried very hard to do is to create a consistent and transparent space for conversation and study and reflection. And I think that's what universities do. And there are now, of course, ways of really shutting that down and not making that happen. So even slight as it may seem, to have a program like this where we actually collectively sit and watch what's happening is itself some understanding of both our, as Elisabeth said, our complicity in what has happened in Palestine, and then to go out and do whatever we can. So, yeah. Thank you for the question. Mm-hmm.
Hi, thank you so much for this. Yeah, I just wanted to ask, so you talked a lot about like the themes that are present within the films. There were also, because we were left with so many coherent themes and visuals and tropes, populations within the film. I was also thinking a lot about what wasn't captured within the films, and most explicitly, we don't see anything that's overtly political, like not even a flag. I don't think, I didn't catch it. And so I'm wondering, that's just one thing, but I'm wondering if you could just speak to what isn't in these films and why you think that might be, like what the framing of the call was, and maybe just what this moment demanded.
Oh, the flag is actually visible twice, but it's in tatters.
Yeah, it's a tatter.
Yeah. I think one of the goals of this film is really to show people in their lives, in their dreams, their aspirations, their despair also. In a way, the political education, it behooves us to inform ourselves, right? It's as if, we cannot expect, I believe, of the subjects of this film to present us that education that we need to acquire. That's one of, as our colleague Shirin Saikali, who is really the scholar of Palestinian studies on this campus, tells her students, and I'm quoting her when, read as if your life depended on it. The public discourse in this country has to change. And, these glimpses into the lives of all these very diverse, vibrant, dreaming, despairing people, perhaps the intention is really to touch our heart rather than to serve a political discourse that will be probably immediately dismissed as, well, here we go again, right? So, that would be my hypothesis here. You can't dismiss these stories, right? They leave a mark, a real mark, hopefully also in our hearts, but, it's not enough to feel pity. We also have to be moved to actually contribute to a change of discourse in this country. And I single out this country because it provides so much of the weapons. And it is, and here I quote Yuval Abraham in his Oscar acceptance speech, it blocks a path to a real solution, this country. That's what the Israeli filmmaker said during his Oscar speech, which is really worth listening to.
And I think what's missing is also, you know, the everydayness or the ordinariness. There is no historical dates. When you're looking at that flower thing that they pull off and they said, you know, you're collecting flower, there's the Red Flower Massacre. It would have been very easy to frame it around an event. We don't have events. We don't have historical dates. You know, these things aren't there. We don't have hospital emergencies. So there are very deliberate things that are missing which foreground the continuity of everyday life. People will always be looking for food and homes and their aspirations. They will be talking about their losses. Things will land in their bodies and minds, and that will continue. And so much of the film is just devoted to that. And that's what I've liked about it. It would be different if we had a few historical events. I think the last one tries to do something with the Nakba, I think, but mostly, I think not.
I'll add one more thing, which, I mean, this is such a great question, like what are the absences? And something that really strikes me, because I've been listening to interviews with Mohammed Al-Kurd, who has a book who just came out, Perfect Victims. And one of the things that strikes me is that there's an incredible range of human emotion depicted in these films. Anguish, you know, hope, joy, fear, love. We get all of it, but we don't see anger, which is almost the most obvious emotion. You would think. Your home has been destroyed, your family has been killed, everything has been taken from you, your school, your art, your craft, everything is gone. And anger is a fundamental and obvious emotion, but there's no place for it on the screen. And Mohammed Al-Kurd and others have written about the fact that this right to anger, this right to an expression of anger, is something that Palestinians have been robbed of in the public sphere. It's too dangerous. And from a young age, children are taught, when you're in front of a camera, you smile. When you're in front of a camera, you tell them the story they want to hear. You know, and this conditioning of what it means to be a victim in the Palestinian context. And this has everything to do with the dehumanization of Arabs and the caricature of the terrorists, the angry Arab, the orientalization, of human beings. And so that really strikes a chord for me, is that there's no rage. You know, and I think it does come from us watching in the audience. You know, it's something that we feel when we watch how the injustice is on screen, but the portrayal isn't there.
I think Dana's question got me thinking, and Mona, your answer also got me thinking about absences. And I want to say two things that we might just maybe have some pause over. One is that I think the political is very present in the film because of a range of things that people are doing in everyday systems and structures that actually allows the political to stage itself. Building a tent actually allows for a political meeting. Having water delivered to a site actually allows for very political forms of gatherings. So I think the political is very much in the film. The moment that struck me was the civil defense groups that actually run and take bodies out of buildings. And a lot of that kind of mutual aid work where people are just automatically kicked into action and move into action. And that's a very organized form of political work. And the reason that struck me in relationship to the conversation on anger that Mona, you just brought up, is I think, yes, Mohammed Al-Kurd is right, but there is a long tradition in Palestinian thinking around both the channeling of anger and the productive use of anger. I don't think people in the film are not angry. I think anger is very much the productive ground on which empathy, loss, love, and resilience can be staged. I think we should think of anger as the kind of fuel that allows itself to kind of nourish a whole lot of other things. Because even in that childhood conversation, right, the child also does something else, which is call the parent to be a better parent. We are all, like as adults, we are moved to action knowing that Palestinian history is the thing that we must pass on to the next generation. So the figure of the child, its existence, the actual existence of children, moves people to channel their anger into reusing and recycling water and building and rebuilding a home in a kind of constitutive cycle where one is inseparable from the other. So the question of, oh, there is no anger, but there is something else, separates anger out in a way that I think is a liberal preoccupation. I'm not sure that that is a preoccupation of Palestinian movement building, sumud, the logic of resistance. I think it's very much a part of it. So I just thought, this is not so much a question, but just as something as food for thought to think about the role of anger actually is central. And the last thing I thought that struck me, Bishnu, you asked the question of what is a thread. One thing that struck me is its engineering. There is a remarkable history of just makeshift engineering that is in every film where people are making all kinds of spaces on the go, which to me is the hallmark of Palestinian life in Gaza and outside, is consistent and engineering again and again. So I just thought I'd throw those out.
Thank you. That's an interesting way of looking at anger. There's no direct confrontation. So it's not it's the form of anger is different. Yeah, it's the form it takes.
Yeah, and I like what you evoked in terms of the engineering, because we see it at every scale in the films, from the puppets and the children, the craft work of the animation that the children do to tell their story, to the homes, to the gray water system. I mean, every aspect of the life requires engineering for the particular purpose, and I appreciate how you reframed where we see that anger in productive ways that are constitutive of the Palestinian existence.
He almost has a stubbornness. Like, we're going to be here and do this and rebuild. And that becomes, a way of, so, great.
I have actually a different reading of this question of anger, and I would like to hear what you think. It's very striking that there seems to be no direct expression of anger. But for me, that's because anger is a secondary emotion. It's not a primary one. It's a shield. Most often, it is a cover and a shield for a feeling hurt, feeling of having been hurt. And it seems to me that most of the people that I just watched in these shorts are well beyond that shield or cover, and they're going to what I would call really a realm of primary affect that is well beyond anger. Now, that's not to say that anger cannot be productive, politically and otherwise, but I think that anger is really besides the point here.
I think there's a lot of food for thought there in these interpretations of, because we are asked to inhabit emotions, of all kinds, and there's a lot to think about in that. But we're well beyond time, and thank you all for those who've stayed with us for the whole program, and I want to give everybody a hand as we close.